What's going on, Chess YouTube? In today's video, we're looking at the 5 best games from round number 1 of the 2024 Wei Rapid and Blitz Team Chess Championship, which is happening right now. And I have to say, these 5 games that I handpicked for you from round number 1 of this tournament are simply going to blow your mind. I mean, check this out. First up, in the first game, we've got Hans Niemann himself, the hottest chess player in the world, my personal favorite chess player. Then we've got Liren, the number 1 Chinese player and the defending world champion. Then Nepomniachtchi, the number 1 rated Russian player in the world. And finally, in games 4 and 5, we have Praggnanandha, the 18-year-old Indian child prodigy who is just tearing up everyone, as well as Wei Yi, the number 2 rated Chinese player, and that guy is also on fire right now. So the lineup from this tournament is simply unbelievable. But these 5 games that I handpicked for you guys are simply on another level in terms of excitement and chess instruction. I mean, if you like wild attacking games, kingside attacks, rook sacrifices, queen sacrifices, I mean, when I first saw these 5 games in action, I felt like I was watching Will Smith teach Chris Rock a lesson at the Oscars. I was completely shocked. Now, heading over to our first game, we have my favorite player and the hottest chess player in the world right now. That is Hans Niemann, yes, the bad boy of chess. I mean, if you follow the chess scene at all, you either love this guy or you hate him. Either way, doesn't matter. We're covering his game first up right here, and this game was wild. Now, in the game, Hans opens 1e4, and his opponent, Melis Anaberdiev, plays 1c5, the Sicilian defense. So we've got a fighting game on our hands. Now, from here, we get a Rosolimo on the board with bishop b5, and black goes for a very popular line right now, knight f6. Now, personally, I didn't think this line was very good, but Fabiano Caruana played it almost exclusively at the 2024 Candidates Tournament, and ever since then, a lot of top players have been playing it. So, personally, I'm starting to reconsider this line. Maybe these top guys know something I don't know. Now, from here, both sides play the absolute strongest moves for a while. Black jumps in with the knight, white goes rook e1. So far, all very, very standard stuff, and we have the first curveball in the game. Black plays the move a6. Now, this is probably not the strongest move in the position. You're simply driving that bishop back to the f1 square. I don't think Hans Niemann is going to be too concerned about that. Instead, the strongest move was simply e5, trying to clamp down in the center. So that would have been the strongest move. And of course, real fast, if you're wondering, knight takes b5 here in this position is simply not good. Yes, you are winning the bishop pair. However, if black is to do that, then white recaptures the knight with the gain of tempo on the queen. He follows up with the move c2 to c4, solidifying the knight, and white is just doing fantastic here. He's going to follow up with ideas like d4 and e5, breaking in the center right away, and black is going to be in a lot of trouble here. So obviously, Melis here, he is no dummy. He does not do that. He's a respectable grandmaster. Instead, he goes a6, kicking the bishop back, and Hans Niemann obliges, bishop f1 on the board. Now, black defends with d6, and here in this position, if white wants to fight for an advantage, it is absolutely critical that he strikes in the center as fast as possible. I mean, his main advantage here is the fact that he's already castled with his king on g1 and the rook on the e-file right now. So white needs to capitalize on the fact that black is still a few moves away from castling, and he does precisely that. Let's go Hans Niemann, taking on d4, jumping forward with the knight, and now we have a transformation of the pawn structure. Now from here, white has that pawn on d5 that could be a weakness or a strength, and the same thing could be said for the black pawn on d4. But overall, white does seem to have something of an advantage. He has that open e-file for the rook, and black's king is still stuck in the middle of the board for right now. Now from here, black's number 1, 2, and 3 priority, of course, is going to be getting that king to safety on the king side. So how is he going to do that? Now, before black and castles, he has to develop that dark squared bishop on f8. So there are 2 main squares where it could go, either e7 or g7. Now, in the game, he chooses the absolute best idea. That is g6 here, preparing ideas like bishop g7. Now, from g7, that bishop will be perfectly placed. It supports the d4 pawn, and just look at the alternative. I mean, instead of that, if black were to go e6 or e5, then white could simply recapture en passant, blowing open the center of the board, and that would be an absolute disaster from black's perspective. So g6, excellent idea from black. Now Hans Niemann, he decides to lock down the center with the idea of c4 followed by d3. So very interesting. Hans is trying to argue that his pawns are now perfectly safe, while black's pawn on d4, despite being supported by the bishop, it is going to be a little bit shaky throughout this game. Now from here, Hans does everything he can to increase the pressure on his lower-rated opponent. Black castles, but now white immediately bishop g5, pressuring that e7 point. Now from here, black is pretty much forced to go e5, trying to defend the pawn, but now Hans Niemann recapturing en passant, d takes, f takes, and we get another interesting transformation of the pawn structure. Now in this position, it is absolutely critical that Hans Niemann finds the right way to put pressure on these pawns, and it turns out the best way to do that is to try and bring your bishop on f1 over to the g4 square. From there, it's pressuring e6. So according to the computer, bishop e2 followed by bishop g4 is the right idea in this position. However, instead of that, Hans Niemann does not find the idea, and he starts to kind of go astray here. He starts with the move queen d2. Now, this move on its own isn't necessarily bad, but it is clear that Hans Niemann doesn't really have the right plan in this position. Now, from here, black e5, bolstering those center pawns. Great idea. And from here, Hans Niemann tries to get some sort of play going on the queen side. He gets his rook on c1, pawn going to b4. His idea is, of course, c5, trying to break on the c-file. And not a bad idea, given that black's queen on c7 is currently opposed the rook. But again, Hans Niemann, I don't know what he's doing with that bishop on f1. That bishop is going to be a huge problem piece throughout this game. So, of course, bishop e2 to g4 would have been a simple way to activate it, but now it's kind of too late to be thinking about that. So from here, black, bishop b7, getting that bishop on the long diagonal, and Hans, he goes f3, trying to blunt the bishop, but that move f3 does not make a good impression. I mean, Ben Feingold, if he was watching this game, would not approve of that move at all, and if you missed the inside joke, Ben Feingold is not a fan of the moves f6 as black or f3 as white, but especially as black. So Ben Feingold, if you're watching, he would not approve of f3. But anyways, on with the game. Here, black, rook f5, followed by bishop f8. He's starting to reorganize his pieces. And already, I'm starting to get a little bit concerned for Hans Niemann, my favorite player. I mean, of course, he is trying to increase pressure on the queen side. He brings his rook over to b1, but I don't know if it's going to be enough. Now, Melis, bishop b7, offering the trade of bishops. I don't think Hans Niemann is going to be too concerned about that. And now Hans, bishop e2. Okay, not a bad idea, but now you would really prefer to have that pawn back on f1 where the bishop had at least a little bit of scope on this diagonal. I mean, so far, Hans's position is just starting to look kind of awkward. I'm not really sure what the bishop or the queen are doing. Yes, the rooks are decently placed, but I mean, Hans is supposed to be significantly stronger than his opponent here. I'm not sure what's going on. All right, black, rook h5. Okay, black is starting to show his aggressive intentions on the king side. Perhaps he wants to go rook 8 f8, maybe queen h4, maybe get some king side threats going with the queen and the rooks and the bishop all lining up. Okay, we've got a game here. Now Hans, queen e1, defending the idea of queen h4, good defense, and now rook f8 from black. Okay, so far the computer still seems to like Hans Niemann's position, assuming he can get a break going on the queen side, but again, I am not feeling too great about this so far. Okay, Hans, from here, he starts to regroup. Rook b to c1. Is his idea c5 on the next move? I think it might be. Okay, black. Here, his best idea is going to be getting his king side play going, and the best way to do that is, of course, to move queen to g5. From there, the queen starts to put pressure on the king side. On the g2 square, it's eyeing e3. At e3 square is especially vulnerable. However, he doesn't find it. He plays bishop c6, and this move looks kind of strange. What's the idea? Well, the idea behind this move is to try and stop Hans Niemann from playing b5, but it turns out this move actually doesn't stop it at all. Hans just plays b5 anyway. Hans Niemann, here we go. Okay, what's the idea? Black takes on b5. Hans Niemann takes back. And in this position, black actually went bishop d5 instead of taking on b5. Okay, real fast. If black had played bishop takes b5, turns out that doesn't actually win a pawn. Hans just goes rook b2. The bishop has to move. Let's say bishop a4. Hans will take back on b6. And here Hans Niemann finally has his queen side play going. With these open files on the queen side, it is going to be so hard for black to actually pull off an attack on the king side. Not to mention his passed pawn on a2. That is going to be a very powerful asset in the endgame. Okay, so instead of that, here on move 26, Melis goes bishop d5 instead of bishop takes b5. However, overall, this feels like a victory for Hans Niemann. Now he has the queen side pressure, the open c-file. He supports the pawn on b5 with a move a4, maybe he wants to go a5 next, and Hans Niemann's starting to take charge in this game, as we would expect. I mean, he is rated 200 points higher than his opponent. Okay, Black finally finds that queen g5 idea. Now he's eyeing e3. Excellent. And Hans, he offers the queen trade, queen g3. Now, if Black takes on g3, all of his attacking pressure is going to be gone. So obviously, he does not want that. He jumps in, queen e2 check. Now Hans once again offers a queen trade. And here Black refuses for the last time. There's simply no way for Hans Niemann to offer a queen trade again. So we are stuck with an uncompromising middle game position. Hans Niemann pressing on the queen side, Black on the king side. Let's see what happens. Okay, from here, basically both sides start shuffling their pieces a little bit. Nothing too crazy happens up until here on move 34. Okay, Melis just brought the bishop back to d5, attacking Hans Niemann's rook on c6. Now, Hans Niemann has to find the right square for the rook. And here, the right move is simply rook c8, pinning Black's rook on f8 to the king, and we're going to have some trades of pieces. Hans Niemann is going to have the queen side pressure, probably the better endgame. He's probably going to be able to convert. So obviously, Hans Niemann in this position, rook c7? Oh no, this is bad. Okay, without that rook on c8, there's no pressure on the rook on f8. And from here, I can only assume that Melis Anamberdiev has been watching one too many Gotham chess videos, because in this position, he sacks the rook. Oh boy, rook takes h3. The idea is simply blowing open the king side, and of course you are removing the defender of the f3 square. Now if g takes, rook takes f3, that is going to be deadly, and that is what happens in the game. G takes, rook takes, and now Melis has a crushing attack. What the heck is Hans Niemann gonna do? I mean, I'm sure at this point in the game, he was saying a whole bunch of four-letter words that I can't say on YouTube in his head. Wow. Okay. Hans, what is he supposed to do? Well, he finds the best move, but this is not a move you want to make. He sacks the queen. That's right. Bishop g2, offering the queen on f2. That is the best move. He takes the bishop on d5 with check, but after king h8, White has a rook plus the bishop for the queen, but that's not enough because Black also has some pawns and a mating attack, and what the heck is Hans gonna do? Okay, Hans, he tries to defend. Rook g1, trying to defend the king side. Black just kind of patiently builds. And here in this position, Hans Niemann had maybe one last resource to turn the tides of the game. The move is ridiculous. Try and find it. If you like puzzles, pause the video right now and try to find this move. Did you find it? Okay, the key idea here that maybe saves the game, maybe, that's a big maybe, is the move a5. Now this move a5, what's it doing? Well, it's basically a clearance move. You're trying to clear the way for the b-pawn to promote in certain lines. And yes, there are lines where that move is insanely important. Here, Black takes the pawn on a5, and then the best move is rook to f1, hitting the queen and also eyeing the f8 square. Maybe there's a back rank mate threat. Of course, this rook on c7 covers the 7th rank. If White is able to get the rook on the 8th rank, that could be checkmate. Without this idea of a5, there is the resource for Black, rook to f2. Now, normally this would save the game for Black and win. However, in this line, with the move a5 and b takes a5 included, here White can take the rook, Black takes back, and then White plays the move b6. And believe it or not, there is nothing Black can do to stop the pawn from promoting in this position. It's going to go to b7. Then White's going to deliver the check on c8, then promote the pawn to a queen. Wow. Okay, so instead of rook f2, Black's going to have to go queen e6 here, trying to defend. And of course, that's his best hope, trying to defend the g8 square, but White wins the queen nonetheless. Rook f8, queen g8, rook takes, king takes. And here, White is simply up a bishop and he's winning. So that there are a lot more lines than that, but the overall point of this is this a5 move would have been enough to maybe save the game, maybe, for Hans Niemann. But he doesn't find it. Instead, he plays rook f1 immediately without the move a5 included. Oh no, here's the difference. Black in the game goes rook to f2. Now, this move was losing with the move a5 and b takes included, but here it is winning. Here's the problem. Rook takes, queen takes, and now the move b6 is not an option. So Hans Niemann, he tries the best that he can, a5, hoping Black will take take, and if he does, he wins. But Melis Anaberdiev, he is on his A game. Queen E1 check, King H2, Queen takes A5, and in this position, Hans Niemann resigns to his lower-rated opponent. Hans got blown off the board as white to someone 200 points lower than him. Oh my goodness, Hans Niemann, he just went from beating Maxime Fashir-Legrave, the blitz specialist in the Speed Chess Championship in round number 1, to losing against an opponent rated 200 points lower than him. Good grief, no wonder people like watching Hans so much. This guy can beat the best players in the world and lose to low-rated GMs. It is so bizarre. All right, our next game features Ding Liren, the number 1 rated player out of China, and the man who also happens to be the current defending world champion of chess. Now, Ding Liren has been struggling a little bit so far this year, but he's starting to find his form, and in the next game, he plays a picture-perfect Alpha Zero style attack, and he even sacrifices his queen against his lower-rated opponent at one point in the game. It is simply unbelievable, and if you've never heard of an Alpha Zero attack or Alpha Zero, don't worry, I'm going to explain all of that in the game. So, overall, Ding Liren, he's really been impressing me lately. Some of the latter games in Norway Chess 2024, he was starting to look pretty good, and overall, I think he's starting to find his form just in time for that big World Championship match in November when he's playing Gukesh, the child prodigy from India. So, with all that being said, let's dive into this game. Now, Ding Liren is playing as white, and already on move 1, he throws everyone a big surprise, and he plays the move E4. Now, already on move 1, this is a big surprise. I mean, typically Ding Liren is known for playing moves like D4, C4, and Knight F3 in this position as white, but instead, 1 E4. All right, let's see what Ding Liren has in mind. Now, his lower-rated opponent, the international master Aslan Aitbayev, hopefully I said his name correctly. He's a reasonably strong IM. He's rated about the same level as Gotham Chess, so pretty decent player, you know. And in the game, he goes for a French defense. Okay, D4, D5. And now Ding obviously has a choice. In the game, he goes for E5, the advanced variation. Now, the advanced variation with E5 is not thought to be as critical as the move Knight to C3. Typically, Knight C3 is seen as the strongest move here, but a lot of top players are playing E5 in this position. And from here, both sides play the standard developing moves, Knight C6, Knight F3, and now Bishop D7 from black. Okay, this idea of Bishop D7 is to block the idea of Bishop B5 in certain lines. This does increase the pressure on the D4 square. And maybe black's going to follow up with like Rook C8, perhaps some fast queenside play. Let's see what happens. Now, Ding Liren, Bishop E2, intending short castles on the king side, and Knight G to E7 from black. Black's going to bring that knight to either F5 or G6, perhaps go Bishop E7 and short castles. So far, so good from both players. Now, castles, Knight G6. This may look like a very calm, relaxed position, but Ding Liren in this game, I don't know what got into him, but he launches an Alpha Zero attack out of nowhere. Now, real fast. Alpha Zero was a crazy powerful computer program developed in 2018 by Google. It played a bunch of matches against Stockfish, and it actually beat Stockfish pretty easily in that match. Now, at the time, Stockfish was supposed to be the strongest chess program, but Alpha Zero simply outclassed it. And to make things even crazier, Alpha Zero developed a chess skill just by playing itself over and over for about 4 hours, and within 4 hours, it was stronger than the strongest chess program in the world. Now, Alpha Zero was an insane attacking program. It loved to attack in almost any position, and its favorite way to attack, especially as white, was to basically launch the H-pawn down the board all the way to H6 in almost any position. So this idea of H4 to H5 to H6, this is basically known as an Alpha Zero attack or an Alpha Zero pawn, according to most grandmasters. How does Ding Liren get the Alpha Zero attack going? Well, H4 right away blunders upon 2, knight takes H4. So that obviously not the right move. Instead, G3 from Ding Liren. The idea is twofold. First of all, he's trying to restrict the mobility of the knight, taking control of the F4 and the H4 squares. However, beyond that, it's also preparing the idea of h4, and the alpha 0 h-pawn is set in motion. So from here, black castles h5, kicking the knight back to the h8 square, and then h6. I'm giving that double exclamation points for style. Here we go, baby. Now from here, black does not have a good choice of options. I mean, the standard choice is going to be either g takes or g6, and both of those are just ugly. Okay, first of all, if you take the pawn, white takes back with the bishop. White has destroyed your pawn structure. Your dark squares are incredibly weak. That is no bueno, mi amigo. Okay, instead of that, g6 was played in the game, and this may look okay for black. I mean, how the heck is white supposed to attack? Well, this is the genius behind the alpha 0 attack. When you study alpha 0's games, when it has this pawn on h6, it's typically not trying to checkmate you right away. I mean, yes, technically there is the threat. If somehow the queen got to g7, that would be a checkmate. So yes, the pawn is an attacking piece, but it's a lot less about the immediate checkmate, and it's more about long-term pressure. So point being, at all points in the future, black is going to have to worry about a queen getting to g7, checkmating the king. But beyond that, there's also going to be back rank mating threats if white ever gets a rook or a queen to the back rank when the pawn is restricting the mobility of the king on g7. And there's even lines in certain scenarios where you can sacrifice pieces on the g6 square, and then after something takes g6, h takes g6, suddenly that pawn has a very easy path to promote on h8. So this idea of that wedge on h6 is just unbelievably dangerous. Okay, real fast, I have to point out, instead of g6 in this position, there is the ridiculous but very strong idea of g5. Now, what's the idea here? Well, black is getting space on the king side. He may have the idea of knight g6 at some point, bringing the knight back into the game, and he may even go g4 at some point, trying to gain even more space on the king side. Now, from here, white has the idea of sacrificing a pawn with b4, blowing open the queen side. It's complicated, but we're not going to go into that too much because it didn't happen in the game. So g6 played in the game, and now Liren, he gives just a masterclass on how to play an alpha 0 style attack. So the first thing you do when you're trying to be alpha 0 is you get that wedge on the h6 square at all costs. h6, g6. That is the first step accomplished. Now what you have to do typically is open up another line of attack, and that is going to mean blowing open the queen side. And Liren, he does not waste any time. He literally immediately gets started on that. D takes, bishop takes, c4. Blowing open the queen side. Liren, my man. Okay, now black f6. He counterattacks. Good idea, but white doesn't care. C takes d5. Continues to blow open the queen side. Now black, knight takes e5, knight c3, knight takes, bishop takes, and e5. We have a big transformation of the pawn structure. What's the idea now? Well, first of all, white still has that wedge on h6. It's perfectly defended by the bishop on c1. That's going to be there forever. Now, beyond that, Liren, he wants to infiltrate on the queen side, perhaps with the c-file, and just slowly increase the pressure. And here's the big point. It's going to be hard to defend the queen side as black because you also have to defend both the king side, that g7 square, and you have to defend against ideas of either infiltrating on the 7th rank or perhaps some back rank mating threats in the future. So there's just so many different threats piling up here. That is the big point. Now from here, black is threatening bishop d6, trying to blockade that pawn on d5. So Liren, he denies it. d6. There will be no blockade in this game. Now black, knight f7, finally getting the knight back into the game, and white takes the pawn on b7. That was part of the idea of d5 here, clearing that line of attack for the bishop. Now bishop takes. Okay, black, rook b8. Bishop d5 retreating. Now black launches the bishop down to the h3 square. White gets out of the attack. And here black's best move, very logical, just taking on d6. Of course, that knight on f7 is currently pinned to the king, so the bishop is the best piece to take with. But he doesn't do that. Instead, bishop d4. What's the idea behind this move? Well, I suppose you're trying to get some sort of dark square blockade. Maybe, but ding Liren, bishop e3, simply trying to remove the bishop. Now, the best move from black, you have to basically admit your mistake and take the bishop on e3, but he doesn't do that. Rook b4. His idea is if bishop takes, rook takes, and suddenly the rook is on d4. It's a monster hitting the queen, but ding Liren, a3, the intermediate move. And the rook is unable to stay on the defense of the d4 square. Okay, what happens here? Aslan takes the bishop and Ding takes the rook. Now Aslan retreats the bishop, but ding Liren just won the exchange. He won the rook for the bishop. And this is where ding Liren channels full, unrestricted Alpha Zero energy in this game. There is nothing I love more in chess than a good Alpha Zero attack. I mean, to me, a good Alpha Zero attack is like, I don't know, Gotham chess seeing someone sack the rook. I get that excited over it. Okay, here we go. Ding Liren, knight b5, launching forward with the knight. Bishop b6, but knight takes a7. Now white has two passed pawns on the queen side. Okay, queen d7 from black. Knight c6, bringing the knight back into the game. King h8, kind of a weird looking move, but he is getting the knight out of the pin of the bishop. Okay, and now rook a6. So white, with a two-pronged attack, both the Alpha Zero pawn and the rook entering the game on the queen side. Now, technically, black can take that pawn on h6, but he does not do it. He goes queen b7, trying to hit the rook. But here, ding Liren, he crashes through, and I mean crashes through. First of all, he sacks the rook. Rook takes b6, queen takes, then he gets rid of that knight on the f7 square. That makes that pawn on h6 literally immortal. Bishop takes, rook takes. Now, the only way to win the pawn is perhaps, you somehow got to get the queen over to here to win it. But that is too slow. Never going to happen. And in the meantime, queen d5 from ding Liren hitting the rook. He is infiltrating. Queen b7 defending. Rook a1. The rook is now threatening all kinds of ideas on the queen side. Oh boy, rook f8 trying to defend, rook a7, the rook enters, and black is not long for this world. Queen b6 trying to defend, and now see if you can find the finishing blow to this game. It's not too hard. I'm going to say you deserve 2 happy meals if you can find this move. Seriously, try and find it, because time is up. On this position, ding Liren, as promised, he sacrifices the queen. Queen f7. Oh boy. 2 threats here. Well, 3 threats. 1, queen g7, checkmate. 2, queen h7, checkmate. 3, queen takes f8, checkmate. And if black takes the queen, then we see the idea of the Alpha Zero attack, rook a8. And now what is black supposed to do? The only thing he can do is delay the inevitable. Bishop c8, rook takes, queen d8, rook takes, rook f8, rook takes, and the rook combined with the Alpha Zero pawn decides the game. Oh my goodness, ding Liren in prime form in this game. Yes, he only beaten I am, blah, blah, blah. But wow, what an attacking game by ding Liren. He typically plays positional chess as white, but wow, this was a killer game. Now, if you thought that last game by ding Liren, the world champion, was wild, wait until you see this one by the Russian super grandmaster Jan Nepomniachtchi. Now, Jan is a really interesting player. For a long time, he used to play very aggressive openings as black, like the Najdorf Sicilian against 1e4 and the Grunfeld against 1d4. However, starting around 2021, he started to abandon these aggressive openings in favor of more solid ones like the Petrov and the Queen's Gambit declined. Nothing wrong with those openings, great openings, they're just not as exciting as the Najdorf, my favorite opening. So imagine my shock when I saw Jan Nepomniachtchi going back to his roots and starting to play the Najdorf almost exclusively against 1e4. So obviously in this game, Jan is playing as black. He plays c5, then he heads for a Najdorf with d6, c takes, knight f6, and a6. But this game in particular, I mean, all Najdorfs are interesting, but this one was just freaking wild. There may or may not be a rook sacrifice in the middle of the game. I mean, just throwing that out there. Hint, hint to wink, wink. All right, from here, one of the things that makes the Najdorf so interesting is white has like a bajillion different options. There's obviously the sharp bishop g5, the English attack with bishop e3 or f3, but then Magnus has been playing rook g1, there's h3, there's a4, there's h4. Fabiano Caruana has a liking for queen d3 lately, a move that makes no sense at all. But in this game, Jan's opponent, hopefully I don't butcher his name, Semitai Tegin, let's just call him white in this game. Jan's opponent, white, he goes for the move a3. Now, this move is basically a waiting move. There are some lines where black wants to go b5, then b4 in the Najdorf, and a3 might be a good idea. But overall, not exactly the most challenging idea from white. So Jan, e5, white goes knight f3. Now, a3 is not a particularly good move in combination with knight f3. If white had gone knight b3, I could maybe see the idea behind it. So already black kind of has an easy game. He goes bishop b7, natural development. White goes bishop g5, knight b to d7, the best square for the knight. And white kind of shows his idea, bishop c4. Okay, time to talk strategy. In the Najdorf, when black goes e5, let's go back to move 6 here, e5 on the board. Black is gaining space in the center, but he's also creating that permanent weakness on the d5 square. So oftentimes, white in these kinds of lines, especially when he goes knight f3, he's going to try to get his bishops to g5 and c4, and the bishop on g5, of course, pressuring the knight on f6 that defends d5, and the bishop on c4, obviously pressuring d5. And so that is what white does in the game. He gets his bishops on g5 and c4, and funnily enough, there is some idea behind this move a3. Here, Jan hits the bishop, b5, and white retreats bishop a2, actually making use of the move a3, so well done. Now, Jan, bishop b7, and technically it's usually a little bit more common to have that bishop on e6 in these types of structures, but overall, white's setup is so non-threatening that the bishop is actually pretty well placed on b7, putting pressure on the e4 square. Okay, from here, white showing his idea, takes on f6, black takes back with the knight, and here, white is still kind of worse. His plan hasn't really planned out. I mean, black's maybe going to have the idea of breaking in the center with d5 at some point. Maybe he's going to go rook c8, threatening an exchange sacrifice so we can take on e4. Black has a lot of ideas. Now, already black is threatening simply taking that pawn on the e4 square after white took the knight. So white has to do something about it. Maybe the best idea here is knight to d2, trying to defend. Maybe the knight later can reroute via f1 to e3 to the d5 square. So overall, knight d2, perhaps the best idea. Let's draw a better arrow. But instead of that, queen d3. Okay, he defends e4, but I don't know about this move. Rook c8. Jan Nepomniachtchi showing he's an experienced Najdorf player. He does not short castle here. Instead, he leaves his king in the middle of the board. It is perfectly safe there for now. There is nothing white can do to attack. And instead, rook c8, putting additional pressure on e4 indirectly by threatening the exchange sack. Now from here, white does have some options. The big decision he has to make is where does he want to put that king? Does he want to go to c1 or does he want to go to the king side with g1 with short castles? And in the game, he does neither. Knight d2. Okay, my best guess behind this move, maybe white was concerned about a potential rook sacrifice with the move rook takes c3. So even if Jan Nepomniachtchi wasn't intending to do that, simply the fact that he played rook c8 on the last move here, rook c8, maybe that scared white into playing the inferior knight to d2, trying to overprotect e4 when it wasn't really necessary. So Jan playing some mind games with his lower rated opponent. Okay, now Jan castles. There is simply nothing else to do besides that. That is the best move. And white makes another really weird mistake. f3. Okay, what the heck? Was that white's idea behind knight d2 here? Knight d2 clearing the f3 square. That way you could go f3 here. If that was his idea, that does not make a whole lot of sense here because Jan immediately queen b6. And this highlights the weakness of the move f3. You simply weaken all the dark squares. And queen b6 immediately taking advantage. White is not going to be able to castle on the king side. So from here, the best move, probably queenside castling. Yes, the king is not going to be perfectly safe there. Black does have that hook on the queenside thanks to that pawn on a3. Black has ideas based on a5, maybe b4, trying to blow open the queenside, but still, long castle is the best idea for white here. But no, knight f1. Okay, this is that idea we talked about earlier, going knight d2, then f1, then e3, then d5. However, once again, it is very, very slow. Here, Jan immediately crashes through on the queenside. His argument is, you're not going to castle kingside. The knight's in the way, the queen's in the way. And on the other hand, white is going to have problems on the queenside, as now Jan is immediately blowing that side of the board up. Okay, white takes on b4, and now the best move would have been simply queen takes b4. It's kind of hard to argue with that. But Jan instead plays the immediate d5. Okay, this move just a little bit premature. Jan's idea is he wants to recapture on b4 with the bishop. However, a better way to do it would have been simply queen takes b4, then almost no matter what white does, then immediately d5. This would have been a better version of it in the game. Now, of course, the knight on c3 is pinned by the queen. White is just in all sorts of trouble. However, instead, d5 on the board immediately, but white does not respond correctly. He takes on d5, but that means immediately bishop takes b4, Jan Nepomniachtchi getting exactly what he wants. Now, technically, white is up one pawn, that pawn on d5. However, it's now occupying the d5 square. That good d5 square was the only good thing about white's position. And now look at it. The queen side blown open. White's never getting to the king side. The king is stuck in the middle of the board. The knight's on f1. The rook out of the game. The bishop not doing much. I mean, this is just a dream position for black in the Najdorf, and white, he is not long for this world. Okay, here, the best move is to come back with the knight and play knight d2. You're blocking the bishop. Maybe you have some way to try and get castles somewhere in. But instead of that, knight e3, and this is just suicidal. Here, Jan showing why he is a world-class player. e4, blowing everything open. You can see the e-file with the king on e1. Just, oh, that is disgusting. F takes, knight takes, black crashing through. White tries to castle, but then immediately black goes for the kill shot. Knight takes, b takes, rook takes, and the knight on e3 is gonna fall. There's the x-ray attack on the king on g1 by the queen. Oh, this is just, oh. And in this position on move 21, white resigns to Jan Nepomniachtchi. I mean, this was the expected result. Jan, world-class player, playing a decent IM, but clearly not on his level. But still, the way he won with the Najdorf in this game, I can only hope he's going to continue playing these more aggressive openings as black. It is just a joy to analyze that as compared to the Petrov. I mean, really, he had to play the Petrov as his main weapon against 1e4. Now, if you thought that last game was crazy, stay with me here. These last two games are going to blow your mind, guaranteed. We got Pragg sacking the queen in game 4, and then Wei Yi sacking the rook in game 5. Both insane attacking games. What more could you ask for? Now, for game number 4, we have Praggnanandhaa. You may have heard of this guy, the Indian child prodigy, super grandmaster, the guy who recently beat Magnus Carlsen himself in classical chess. Well, this next game by Pragg was simply unbelievable. I mean, there's a reason Gotham Chess calls this guy Magnus Carlsen. He is a fighter. He just loves to throw weird curveballs at his opponents and get into weird attacking positions in his games. So I don't want to ruin this one beyond you, beyond the fact there may be a queen sacrifice and the entire game is just nuts. Okay, in the game, Pragg is playing as black. His opponent, Mikhail Markov, the international master, he's playing as white. He opens 1c4. Pragg goes e5. And on move 2, we have the move a3. What the heck am I looking at? a3 really against Pragg, the super grandmaster? You play that as an IM. Oh no, what am I looking at? All right, the idea behind this move, it's basically a pass. There may be some positions where a3 is useful covering the b4 square, but overall, white is just kind of passing the move to black. So Pragg, knight f6, then breaks in the center with d5. Very logical stuff. But here we see the point of white's move a3. Bang, he immediately breaks in the center with e5, and we we have some sort of weird Sveshnikov or Kalashnikov Sicilian-style position. Okay, what the heck is black supposed to do? Well, there are a lot of options. Knight takes c3 is pretty simple, but Pragg, he keeps the knights on the board. Knight e7. His idea is to reroute the knight to the g6 square, go bishop e7, castles, and overall have a pretty good position as black in a very complicated game, which is definitely what he wants here. Now, from here, both sides continue developing. White going bishop c4, preparing castling. Black, knight g6. He wants to go bishop e7 next. So far, so good. Now, d3, bishop e7, and here is the second surprise from white in this game. h4. Oh my goodness, what the heck is this guy doing? First of all, not a good move. Instead, short castles was the way here. But instead, this is where we're at. h4, another alpha zero attack. We saw with Ding Liren, now we're seeing it with Mikhail Markov. Okay, first of all, this idea of h4, it is always dangerous whenever black has that knight on g6 for the simple reason that h4 to h5 would hit the knight with tempo. White can go h6 if he wants to. So overall, very, very dangerous. But there's just one problem. Here, Pragg goes bishop g4, and white's whole idea is starting to look really, really bad. What's the problem? Okay, white, he goes h5, but then knight h4, and we can see the bishop and the knight piling up on that knight on f3. Oh, that is the problem. Oh no, white, king f1, decent move. I guess f1 is now the best square for the king. You want to keep your rook on h1, supporting the pawn a little bit. Oh no, this is bad. Okay, queen d7 from Pragg. Flexible move. He can now go short castles or long castles, depending on what he wants to do. Now, white, knight d5. Okay, and Pragg, he takes on f3, but he takes with the wrong piece. The right piece here is knight takes f3. Then after knight takes, g takes, you just retreat, bishop e6. You got a wonderful game. I mean, white's pawn structure is an absolute mess, and Pragg is sitting pretty. But instead of that, he takes with the bishop. Bishop takes f3. What's the idea? G takes, knight d4. Okay, he wants to put pressure on that f3 pawn. Both knights attacking it currently. But there's one problem. White can simply go f4, getting rid of the double pawn, and suddenly the knights aren't really doing anything. I mean, yeah, knight can jump into f3, but what does that accomplish? Well, as fate would have it, Pragg's opponent didn't go f4. He went h6, continuing with the alpha zero attack. Now, this move here just kind of looks ridiculous. Black can castle queenside, no problem. There's no real threat. So overall, kind of a silly looking move. And now the best move here, just as we saw in that Ding Liren game, is actually g5. And from there, the bishop supports the pawn. The queen can always replace the bishop. The pawn supports the knight. And white's whole attack is kind of over. And that pawn on h6 would be left to die. However, oh no, c6 on the board. And this gives black one last chance to somehow try and get that f4 break in the game. And he finds it. Credit to Mikhail Markov in this game. He finds it. Knight takes, queen takes, f4. And suddenly, white is getting the initiative in this game. Oh my goodness. And now Pragg, he makes another mistake. G takes h6. That is not the way. Instead, despite there not being a pawn on f3, knight hf3 is actually the right move here, trying to clog the king side a little bit with the knights. But instead, g takes, and now queen h5. And suddenly, the white queen is actually pretty active. It's threatening the knight on h4. It's threatening the pawn on h6. And how is black supposed to defend? Okay, first priority, you don't want to hang that knight. Knight g6 by Pragg. And now the obvious looking move is queen takes h6. But Mikhail Markov, he knows the initiative is more important. He goes f5, hitting the knight. Brilliant stuff. Okay, knight f4. Now he takes it, now that his queen was under attack. Queen takes h6. Okay, material is equal, but look at the pieces. Okay, we have the two knights of Pragg. They are pretty well placed on d4 and f4, but they're not really attacking anything. Meanwhile, white has two bishops. This bishop on c1 can always be traded for that knight on the f4 square. And believe it or not, white's king on the f1 square is actually pretty safe. Okay, this is just unbelievable. White's idea in this game with a3, then the alpha zero attack, that was not supposed to work at all, but here we are. Okay, how does Pragg deal with this? He starts long castles, getting his king out of the center, and now obviously white takes the knight on f4, wins back the pawn. White is now up a pawn. Now, yes, that pawn is doubled on the f-file, but still. Okay, here, Pragg. He is not about to lose to his lower-rated opponent without a fight. h5, getting space on the king side, activating the rook a little bit, not bad. And of course, in various lines, there are going to be ideas like h4, maybe even continuing to push the pawn down the board, and the rook is going to be a little bit more active now that the h-pawn is into the game. Okay, Mikhail Markov, rook c1, good idea, increasing the pressure on the king. And now from here, we clearly have kings on opposite sides of the board, so both sides start to build up their attack. Black getting the rooks over to the king side, white trying to gain space on the queen side. And here, Mikhail Markov, another big decision to make. In the game, he tries to play the very cheeky idea of bishop d5. The idea, obviously, is that bishop cannot be taken. The pawn on c6 is pinned to the king. That pawn is going nowhere. However, beyond that, what was the idea of this move? Okay, first of all, there is a hidden threat. Queen takes d4. The bishop is now blocking the communication of the rook with the knight, so the knight is hanging. The queen can take it. However, there is just one problem with bishop d5. Can you find Pragg's idea here? It's pretty simple, but it's a sweet move. Knight takes f5. Boom! And now here's the point. If white takes the knight, black is going to take the bishop on d5. So obviously, white cannot do that. So what does white do here? Queen a7, infiltrating with the queen on the queen side. Not a bad idea. But now black, rook h6. Brilliant move by Pragg. Okay, obviously the idea here is white had all sorts of sacrificial ideas on c6. Bishop takes c6, then rook takes, and here rook h6, defending on the 6th rank with the c-pawn. Oh my goodness, if we go back in time, we are seeing the benefit of the move h5 in this position, activating the rook, giving it more breathing room, and now taking full advantage of that breathing room with the move rook h6. Pragg, my goodness. Okay, surprisingly, Mikhail Markov is putting up a hell of a fight in this game. Rook takes h5. Obviously, the threat here is if Pragg takes the rook, there's going to be some sort of sacrifice on the c6 square. So rook takes h5, a very simple deflection, at the very least trying to win a pawn. But Pragg, he's in a fighting mood, and he takes the rook. Oh my good golly grief. Okay, from here, you know there's going to be a sacrifice on c6. Is it the bishop? Is it the rook? It's the rook. Rook takes c6, sacking the rook. Now, king d7, getting out of the check. So far, so good. Mikhail Markov takes the pawn on b7. King e8, starting to look like the king is getting out of danger. Now, it's important to note here that Pragg is up material. He does have the extra rook. White has 2 pawns. Overall, it's very, very good for black. So white here, he really, really needs to get some sort of attack going. If he cannot find a way to almost force a checkmate, it is going to be ugly for white. So white obviously does not want to trade queens. He goes rook c7, hitting the queen with the rook. And in this position, Pragg busts out just an unbelievable idea. If you like puzzles, pause right now. This one, man, I'm going to say you deserve 5 out of 5 Happy Meals if you can find this move right here. Seriously though, pause the video and try to solve this. It's a zinger. Okay, time's up. That's all I'm giving you. This is where Pragg sacks the queen. Okay, what's the idea? First of all, f takes e3 is suicide. The king is too exposed. Queen f6. There's too many ideas. So that, you cannot do that. Instead, knight e3. Now white, king e2, threatening the knight for real. And here's Pragg's idea. Knight takes d5. Stay with me here. White can still win the queen, and that is what he does in the game. Rook takes, and Pragg takes back. Now, you may be wondering, didn't Pragg just give up his queen, the most valuable piece on the chessboard, for a rook and a bishop, 2 pieces that are clearly not on the queen's level? And the answer is yes. That is exactly what happened. Pragg, he purposefully sacrificed the queen because he knew he was already up so much material. All he had to do in this position was simplify a little bit, and Pragg, he's willing to give up a little bit of material in order to simplify, get some pieces off the board. And here, even though he did technically lose a little bit of material, he's still up a knight versus the 2 pawns of white. I mean, the queen and the rook's roughly equal. So Pragg, up material. My goodness. Okay, from here, obviously, very imbalanced material. White with the queen, black with the rooks and the knight. So obviously lots and lots of tactics from here. White tries to hang in, but Pragg slowly brings in his pieces. He wins the pawn on d3, and White tries to check the black king. Not enough. King e7, b6. White trying to push those pawns, but now Pragg closes in. Rook h3. White goes f3, and now it may look like White is defending, but he is not. Rook takes f3. Oh, the idea is if the king takes, knight e5, checking the king and hitting the queen. Oh, that would be all she wrote. So White has to go back king e2. This is going from bad to worse for White. Or is it? In this position, Pragg, he retreats the rook, hitting the queen. Rook f6 looks like a very logical move, but there is one problem. Queen b5. Mikhail Markov, he equalizes the game on the spot with this brilliant move, queen b5. Okay, here's the problem. First of all, there is the pin on the knight, but White does not want to win the knight. He simply wants to restrict the mobility of the knight. Meanwhile, he's going to push these pawns up the board. Wow, what an idea. Okay, Pragg, he's not out of the game yet. Knight c1, hitting the king. King e1, knight d3, king e2. Now, obviously, Pragg, if he wanted to, his opponent is offering a draw. He could go knight c1, king e1, knight d3, king e2, and get a draw. We have a threefold repetition, but Pragg, he does not go for that. No, instead, in this position, rook f2. Pragg is fighting on. Okay, king e3, rook b2, getting behind the passed pawn. Good idea. Queen c4. But it turns out queen c4 is a fatal mistake. Instead, he had to find the move queen g5 check to keep the game going. But instead of that, queen c4 on the board here, and now Pragg with the clutch move, rook d7. Obviously, the idea is very simple. That pawn is never, ever going to the b7 square. And what is Mikhail Markov as White supposed to do here? He tries to press on, but there is just nothing he can do. The knight comes back, the king goes forward, and in this position, White resigns. There is simply no way to stop him from losing those pawns on the queen side. Pragg has too much material, and that is it. GG, game over. Praggnanandha, the Indian prodigy, wins the game. Now stay with me. If you made it this far, keep going. We got one last game. It is a short game, but it is simply unbelievable. Now, on to the final game. Ayaan Akhmatov versus Wei Yi. And Wei Yi, if you haven't heard of this guy, you should. He is the #2 rated player out of China. He is on fire recently. He just won the 2024 Tata Steel Masters, and he just hit his highest rating ever of 2755. That is unbelievable. Now, as for his opponent, decently strong international master, and I couldn't find a picture of him, so this is kind of what we got. I imagine he looks something like Fat Thor, probably a decent looking guy, so hence the picture, but bear with me here. But as for the game, Wei Yi, he's one of the most aggressive attacking players in the game, and to call this an attacking game by Wei Yi is simply an understatement. He goes all out. He wants blood. I mean, watching this game, I felt like I was watching Hans Niemann play Magnus Carlsen in their first over-the-board classical rematch game. I mean, the vengeance in Wei Yi's eyes as he went all out in this game, oh my goodness, I don't want to ruin anything, but you just gotta watch until the end here. I mean, the payoff right in the middle of the game. Oh, okay, in the game, Ayaan Akhmatov opens 1d4, Wei Yi, knight f6. Now we get a London system on move 2, and Wei Yi wants to do sort of a Grunfeld King's Indian style counter to it. And Ayaan Akhmatov throws a little bit of a curveball with knight c3, the Obava London system. So from here, White's idea typically is to do something like queen d2, long castles, maybe h4, h5, and just try to get an attack going. So Black, on the other hand, plays very classically d5, bishop g7, and now if White wanted to go h4 and attack, this would probably be a good position for it, but instead of that, knight f3, Ayaan playing a little more classically here so far, and indeed, bishop e2, normal development. Meanwhile, Wei Yi strikes back in the center. Wei Yi has played perfectly so far. He gets his king to safety. He strikes c5, so far so good. And here, Ayaan Akhmatov, he goes h4. Ayaan, what am I looking at? If you wanted to go h4, the right move was on move 5, h4 here before you block the queen's connection with the h5 square. But instead, after knight f3, that idea becomes way weaker, but Ayan, he's going for it anyway. Man, Ayan is really playing like drunk fat Thor in this game, and no disrespect at all to Ayan, but that's kind of what I think of when I see this move on the board. I mean, I see Thor drinking too much, eating too much, getting pissed off at Noob Master 69, beating him up in that game. Anywho, back to the game here. Wei Yi striking in the center. C takes d4. E takes knight c6. And now knight e5, jumping forward with the knight. Okay, perhaps this is the idea. The knight no longer blocking the bishop's communication with the h5 square. Maybe Wei can get some sort of attack here. Well, let's see. Okay, Wei Yi, he senses danger. h5, blocking h5 ideas from white. Solid stuff. Now, queen d2, preparing long castling. So far, so good. Bishop f5, f3... I'm not sure how I feel about f3 here. Technically, white's going to have g4 IDs in the future, but it does weaken squares on the king side. All right, I can live with it. And Wei Yi, rook c8. Very solid stuff. Rook obviously belongs on the open c file. And here, white plays a very slow move a3. I'm not really sure I understand the idea behind this move. Yes, there are technically some ideas based on knight b4. Maybe it's good to cover it. But again, so far in this game, white is playing this weird mishmash of ideas, and he's not really getting anything done. Meanwhile, black is castled, got his open rook on the c-file, got his bishop out, hitting c2. So far, Wei Yi really showing his class, just playing logical developing moves and getting a much better position. Now from here, Wei Yi takes on e5 with the knight, clearing the way for the rook. All right, and white, he pretty much has to take back with the bishop. That would be the best move, decreasing the amount of imbalance on the board, but instead, white does not do that. He takes with the pawn. D takes e5. Okay, this move is a serious tactical mistake. There are a number of ideas for black here. Knight d7 is pretty solid, but the even stronger idea is simply d4, blowing open the game, and white's king has not castled. Oh no. Okay, real fast. The main line, if Wei Yi had gone d4, it's wild. You go d4. Then white takes the knight. Black takes the knight. White takes the queen. Black takes back. F takes g7, winning the bishop. Then c takes b2. Now rook b1, rook takes, king f2, f6, and finally here we reach this position where white technically is up material. He has the two bishops, black only has one. However, that pawn on b2 is such a menace. It is almost impossible for white to get rid of it. And here black is just dominating the board. So overall, d4 would have been a crushing move in this position. d4 blowing open the game. However, of course, Wei Yi is the much stronger rated player. It was not totally necessary to do that. And after the move he played in the game, knight to d7, he's still perfectly fine and in control. Now, the drawback of knight to d7 from black, of course, is that you're no longer defending the pawn on d5. So white gobbles that pawn up real fast. Queen takes d5. However, here, Wei Yi, he doesn't care at all. Queen b6. And suddenly, look at this queen hitting b2, slicing through this diagonal. I mean, what the heck is white supposed to do? What's he going to do about his king? And in the game, Ayan Akhmatov was asking the exact same question. What do I do about my king? And his solution here was long castles, but this is suicide. Oh no, this is suicide. Wei Yi, knight takes e5. Oh my goodness, and that knight is poisoned. You can't take it. You can't take the knight. I mean, whatever you do not play bishop takes e5. Literally anything else is better. Rook he1, whatever. Just don't take the knight. But what does white do here? He takes the knight. Oh no, white is just begging Wei Yi to blow him off the board. And that is pretty much what happens starting from here. Wei Yi launches in with the queen to e3. Now, of course, you are forking the king and the bishop. That is the problem with bishop takes e5. The knight was poisoned. You can't do that. But that's what happened. Bishop takes queen e3. Now queen d2 trying to defend, but queen takes e5. And here, material is equal, but that is just a small part of the story. I mean, compare the king safety of white versus black. Compare the minor pieces. Look at these bishops slicing across the board. The rook is more active. The queen is more active. I mean, black just has all of the arrows going in this position in his favor. Now, from here, what is white supposed to do? In the game, he plays the move g4, It's technically a bad move, but it's actually a good practical choice. I mean, if white just sits back and waits, he's going to be obliterated. So with that in mind, he plays the desperation move g4, but this was not a good move at all, and leave it to an attacking player like Wei Yi to show the way. Now, if you like puzzles, again, go ahead and pause the video right now. This is a really good time to try and solve a puzzle. And I'm going to say, how about 3 happy meals here if you can calculate it all the way to the end, only if. All right, I hope you find this one. It's a zinger. Yes, Wei Yi on move 19, he sacks the rook. Rook takes c3. Here we go. What's the idea? White has to take back with the b-pawn, but then queen c5, of course, hitting a3. Now white tries to defend, king b2, but rook c8, and look at all of these pieces from the black position slicing through, and it's as if black is up like multiple pieces. I mean, what is his rook on h1 doing? First of all, absolutely nothing. And beyond that, of course, the immediate threat is simply bishop takes c3, forking the king and the queen. That is going to be ugly. And in the game, white cannot find anything to do about that threat. He takes the bishop on f5, g takes f5, but then of course Wei Yi, bishop takes c3, crashing through, the king moves, takes the queen, and then we have rook takes, queen takes, and from here, Wei Yi just absolutely cleans up. That queen is just way too powerful, and white really has no chance in the rest of this game. And in this position, on move 30, Wei Yi's opponent, Ayaan Akhmatov, resigns. He is finished. Wow, what a game, and what a series of games from the FIDE World Team Rapid and Blitz Championships in 2024. I mean, these games were simply incredible across the board, but especially these 5 I handpicked for you guys. Now, if you enjoyed this video, I am going to be covering every single round of this tournament, so make sure to keep coming back for the latest update on this. And in the meantime, go ahead and subscribe and check out my Hans Niemann playlist, which is showing up on your screen right now. And I'll see you in the next video.